Maureen Galindo is a Democrat who ran for the House in Texas this year. But she's also said during the campaign she wants to turn the ICE detention center in her district into a prison for Zionists and ICE officers. I guess she thinks she's progressive? Because hating ICE, okay, check, and hating Jews, sure, that's progressive now. Crazy. It's just not a deal breaker anymore for running. Politics has always been a crazy game, but the people running weren't this crazy.
The midterm elections are approaching fast, and Bill Maher is once again sounding the warning sirens, much like he did before Democrats suffered major setbacks in 2024. To him, examples like Graham Plattner's apparent double standards highlight a deeper problem within a party that frequently demands accountability from others while struggling to apply the same standards internally. Maher's assessment was sharp, uncompromising, and impossible to ignore. So if you enjoy bold political commentary, hit that subscribe button and let's jump right in.
And finally, new rule, let's get real about Graham Plattner. If you've been sleeping on politics lately, well, who can blame you? But the big story is the Democrats can likely take back the Senate in November if they win Maine. But their local candidate official now up there is, after the primary this week, let's just say a guy who has a backstory that screams, don't ask. Now, I don't judge Graham Plattner because I'm just learning who he is. Problem is, so is he. What I do know is he served his country in the Marines in war, and you can never discount how big that is. But then there's the sexting while married, scary behavior, so say some of his exes, old posts about how he's a communist and all cops are bastards and black people don't tip.
Maher brings this issue up because he believes it reflects the broader transformation of the Democratic Party over the past several years. Not long ago, prominent Democrats openly supported the defund the police movement, often dismissing concerns about public safety raised by critics. More recently, figures such as Zoran Mamdani and AOC have promoted policies that opponents describe as heavily progressive or socialist in nature. Then there is Bernie Sanders, who spent years campaigning on aggressive taxation proposals aimed at the wealthiest Americans. I won't reveal Maher's entire argument just yet, but if Graham Plattner truly aligns with that same political approach, Maher suggests Democrats could face serious trouble. In his view, they are not simply risking a few electoral losses, they could potentially jeopardize support in places like Maine, a state many assume should naturally lean in their direction. Stay with us because Maher's explanation of why this matters is worth hearing in full.
Here's a typical Plattner quote he said about the Iraq War. You can think it's dumb and also kind of not want to miss it. Oh, Graham, I feel the same way about so many things. The Oscars, Christmas, Taylor Swift's wedding, that little speech Nicole Kidman gives before the movie comes on where she looks insane. And then, of course, there's the Nazi tattoo on his chest. I mean, seriously, this guy's whole life is the movie The Hangover. He doesn't need a term in the Senate, he needs a gap year in Costa Rica.
That is exactly the point Maher has been making for years, and there is something almost ironic about watching it play out. These are the same policies and priorities that Democratic leaders embraced despite repeated warnings from critics. Those warnings were often dismissed at the time, yet now the political consequences appear increasingly visible. If Maine were a deeply entrenched Democratic stronghold, perhaps a candidate like Plattner could rely solely on ideology and still win comfortably. But Maine has never been that predictable. The state is known for its independent-minded voters, its willingness to split tickets, and its tendency to reward practicality over party loyalty. This is the same state that repeatedly elected Susan Collins and often values moderation over ideological rigidity. That is why Maher argues that pushing far-left messaging in a place like Maine is less about building support and more about testing the limits of voter patience.
Yet, I would still urge the folks in Maine to vote for him. For two reasons. One, we need to restore balance in our government, and a Democratic Senate would help a lot with that. And two, get used to it. America is a country filled with a lot of broken, horribly educated, phone-addicted, sort of nutty people. And as long as we live in a representative democracy, we are always electing our reflection in the mirror.
Maher views Platner as more of a reflection of the Democratic National Committee's current priorities than a reflection of where the average American voter actually stands. In his eyes, Platner is a candidate elevated by party leadership because they believe he represents the future direction they want to pursue. However, Maher strongly disagrees with the argument that voters should support Democratic candidates simply to create balance in the Senate. According to him, that reasoning falls apart when examined closely. Political institutions do not benefit from balance alone. What matters most is electing candidates who bring thoughtful ideas, effective policies, and genuine representation to the people they serve. Filling seats for the sake of achieving numerical symmetry is not enough. Maher believes voters should focus on competence and substance rather than treating elections as little more than exercises in political arithmetic.
Oh, there's going to be more bad tweets from candidates that haven't aged well, more bad tattoos. Did Platner know the tattoo was a Nazi symbol when he got it? Maybe. But people today are so inundated with misinformation and internet bullshit, I wouldn't trust he knew what it stood for anyway. Everything people know now is from social media and shit posting and whatever some other idiot sends them, or whatever the Chinese are feeding them on TikTok.
Maher argues that many people, particularly within progressive political circles, have become increasingly comfortable living inside ideological bubbles. Rather than engaging with opposing viewpoints or challenging information, they often avoid perspectives that might make them uncomfortable. In his view, that tendency creates an environment where misinformation can thrive because individuals only consume content that reinforces what they already believe. When people surround themselves exclusively with voices that agree with them, they lose the ability to critically evaluate alternative arguments. Over time, that isolation can foster not only misunderstanding but also overconfidence. Maher believes this dynamic explains why so many people are shocked when election outcomes or public opinion fail to align with the expectations.
Maureen Galindo is a Democrat who ran for the House in Texas this year. But she's also said during the campaign she wants to turn the ICE detention center in her district into a prison for Zionists and ICE officers. But she says, putting Zionist billionaires in prison does not mean putting all Jews in internment camps. So a moderate. I guess she thinks she's progressive? Because hating ICE, okay, check, and hating Jews, sure, that's progressive now. But concentration camps?
According to Maher, this behavior is typical of career politicians who are more interested in pleasing their base than developing practical solutions. He points to figures like Maureen Galindo as examples of leaders who often present selective versions of reality in order to generate political support. Take the proposal to convert ICE detention facilities into prisons. Maher questions what problem such a move would actually solve. It does not strengthen border security. It does not reduce bureaucratic delays. It does not improve the immigration process itself. Instead, he argues, it merely changes the label attached to the problem without addressing its root causes. To Maher, proposals like these are often designed to create attention-grabbing headlines and social media engagement rather than meaningful policy outcomes. He sees them as political theater disguised as reform.
See, it's just not a deal breaker anymore for running. Politics has always been a crazy game, but the people running weren't this crazy.
Maher believes American politics did not become this polarized overnight. In his view, the shift began gradually, with cultural and political changes that accelerated over time. He argues that some of those developments emerged during the Obama years, although they became much more pronounced afterward. Since then, he says, increasingly unconventional ideas have moved from the political fringes into mainstream discussions. At the same time, politicians who embrace highly ideological positions have gained greater visibility and influence, often relying on controversy and outrage to attract attention. Maher's warning is straightforward. He believes that unless the political left reconnects with a more traditional form of liberalism, one centered on open discussion, tolerance of disagreement, and practical problem-solving, it will continue to struggle in competitive elections where broad public support is essential. According to him, Winning those contests requires more than enthusiasm. It requires appealing to voters beyond the party's most committed supporters.